Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast, supported by Museum Development North and Arts Council England.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 2 of A Tale of Two Ansons. This second Anson at the museum, C19 TX214, was built in 1946 at Avro's wartime shadow factory at Yeadon Aerodrome, which is now Leeds Bradford Airport. At the peak of production, around 135 Ansons were being built at Yeadon every month. Production shifted back to Chadderton, with assembly at Woodford from 1947. TX214 remained in operational service with the RAF until August 1963, when it was struck off charge and moved to the museum at RAF Henlow, then went in 1978 to the Aerospace Museum at RAF Cosford, which subsequently became the RAF Museum Midlands. I went over to the CAE building at Woodford to talk to two members of the refurbishment team, Steve Barron and Pete Jenkins. We talked about how the refurbishment is being planned and delivered, and how some of the challenges are being overcome. But before that, we reflected on the wider story of the Anson, from its beginnings in the mid-1930s to its final retirement from the RAF in 1968 after giving 32 years of continuous service. Hear about the Anson as a combat aircraft, and we learn of an unusual landing technique, definitely not to be recommended. I'll let Steve and Pete start our Anson story.
Good morning, Chris. The Avro Anson was built in response to a request from a company called Imperial Airways to build a 4 to 6 seater transport and mail aircraft in about 1933, and this became the Avro 652 Anson. We eventually sold over 11,000 of them because it was such a good, strong, sturdy, reliable aircraft. It was powered by 2 Cheetah engines and was obviously quite good, but as time went on, it got even better because they turned it into a multi-role aeroplane whereby it trained navigators, gunners, wireless operators, pilots on multi-engines, and even bombers. But from what I've just read recently, it did put quite a strain on the engines. I don't think they really beefed them up. They may well have done, but I'll have to do some more investigation on that. It was also, I think, the first Avro aircraft with a fully retractable undercarriage, and it took 140 odd turns of a hand crank handle to raise and lower the undercarriage. So I believe many students, when they were flying, used to leave the wheels down and fly at a slower speed just so they didn't have to go through that. Later versions were hydraulic, so that did change, particularly the military ones, and they were signified as Avro Anson 652As. Underneath everything, right at the start of it, you've got a one-piece tube steel framework, which everything then hangs off, and at first I think it was a mainly wooden wing, and it became eventually more metal or all metal. Certainly much bigger construction was metal later on. The Anson, like I say, first flew 1934-35, went on into production till 1952, and I believe they were in service till at least the mid-60s with the RAF and even the Royal Navy, I believe, liked them up.
At the start of the Second World War, the Anson was pressed into service with Coastal Command because of a lack of other suitable aircraft, and it did good service hunting U-boats and protecting coastal convoys, but it didn't have a great range, only about 300 miles out, 300 miles back, and it only carried 360 pounds of bombs or depth charges, which is rather a puny weapon. So it wasn't used for very long before other aircraft came in to take over its role. Ansons were also manufactured in Canada because that was the centre of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, where the majority of Bomber Command aircrew were trained. The ones that were made in Canada had an American Jacobs engine, which is slightly more powerful than the Cheetah one. Of the 11,000 Ansons built in total, nearly 3,000 were made in Canada.
What was the reason for that? That's because lots of the training was taking place over that, so that's why they needed the aircraft.
It was also a safe place to build them, and I believe we could use Canadian materials it wasn't putting a strain on the British metals and cloths. So it was a useful conduit.
Over 100,000 aircrew trained in Canada during the war. It's a huge operation. And there's still some of the airfields left with the old wooden hangars there.
But just to go back to what Pete was saying, I found a fact that in 1939, an Anson of 500 squadron made the first RAF attack on a German U-boat. And in 1940, rather unbelievably, if you look at the aeroplane, you wouldn't think it was a fighter plane by any means. It did have a weapon, it did have a gun, and I believe it had 2 guns actually. A pilot could operate a fixed gun. In 1940, 3 Ansons were attacked by 9 Messerschmitt 109s. The Ansons shot down 2 ME 109s and damaged a third, and then escaped home unscathed. So marvellous. But I suppose it must have been overtaken later very, very quickly actually. And the Air Force, I think, pulled it back from that role then. And as Pete said, it was mainly coastal command, shipping protection. But I do know it became a very useful flying school. The instructors could either work from on the ground, or if necessary, they could go up in the air with the young students and show them the wireless, show them bomb aiming, gunnery and pilot training, all of those things, because the aircraft had quite a large cabin for its size. So again, very, very useful aircraft, and no wonder it sold in the number that it did. Very stable, and I believe very reliable. One other thing I've just read recently was, you may notice, not on our aircraft, but if you ever see an Anson with its wheels up, the wheels stick out of the bottom of the engine nacelle. Very early in their service, an RAF pilot landed the aircraft with the wheels up. Unfortunately, he forgot to put them down, but luckily, because they stuck out, the only real damage was to the propellers and the bottom of the engine nacelles, and the aircraft was back in service fairly quickly. Something that air forces and I suppose governments really, really like.
So it would be good to hear a little bit now about this particular Anson and where it's come from, the work that's going on, and so on.
We acquired this Anson. It's a Mark 19 built originally at Yeadon, the Avro factory there, which is the Leeds Bradford Airport now. We acquired it from the RAF Museum at Cosford. They're making room for other exhibits, and it came to its natural home here at Woodford. It came on 3 low loaders, and we're in the process of slowly putting it back together and making it look pretty again.
Yes, we've been slowly prettying the aircraft up, as Pete said, with the help of Dave West, whose skills in skinning and retaping the aircraft, because there is a lot of cloth on the aircraft, particularly where the joints are concerned. He's been invaluable with his assistance. We've also got a guy named Carl, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but he's been very helpful, always mucking in. We've managed to rejoin the wings to the fuselage. We're in the process. We're halfway through fitting the engines back onto it, and then there'll be general cowling up, cleaning, making it look nice. But hopefully going forward we can do a fair bit more, but we do know that we may have to strip it all down again in a few years to move it to our hopefully new extension.
What sort of state was the aircraft in when it arrived?
I think it was fairly good condition. I think it had been in Cosford for about 30 years. It was moved there in 1978 actually, and stayed inside. Don't think it ever moved or had anything done to it, but basically I think keeping it in the dry has kept it in fairly good order. We've not yet managed to sort of venture into the cabin area, as we've been most people will see the outside. So for now we thought we'd get that right. So like I say, it's been mainly panelling up, and Dave did a very good repair on the door actually, which we'd noticed had dried and the wood had all split and cracked. We've repaired that, and Pete's put the door thresholds back in, etc. So it's coming along. We just need a bit more time.
And in an aircraft of this age, what are usually the biggest challenges, the biggest things to overcome really to get it to the state that you want to get it back in?
I suppose it's 80 years old, but there's very little corrosion on it. It's just we don't have to get it back to flying conditions, so it's not too difficult a job really. If things do come apart quite nice, then go back together okay. Yeah, surprising really. Fellow volunteers Trevor Jackson and Roger Newton have done I've had some engineering work done on the engine mounting bolts because they were pretty worn and the threads were damaged. So an engineering works in Handforth called Appel Engineering Limited have made some new bolts which are quite complicated because they're tapered bolts, and they've made it easier refitting the engine that we have refitted. So thank you to them.
And what do we know, Steve, about this particular aircraft?
Well, I only got a few facts really, but one of the main ones was it was the last aircraft to fly out of RAF Hendon in 1957. It entered service in 1948, was a RAF Staff College communications flight aircraft. It even served in Ireland, I think, when I've read it. One thing, just to go back a little bit, you were saying, what are we maybe struggling with? When the guys took it apart at Cosford, I think some of the things must have been a bit tight and they've drilled them out. So we're lacking in certain screws and then the right screw thread. We have to look at, I think, the BSF red. There is a few bits where they're not suitable to go back in either, but hopefully Dave's magic covering a few of those things is really paying dividends.
Well, with Finch on the outside, that's looking forward to starting. It's just quite luxurious inside, curtains and vents. We need to get some toilet.
So once we've acquired an aircraft like this, in this case of RAF Cosford, what's the process at the museum in terms of, right, who's going to do this job?
I was approached by Ray Reeder, asked if I would take on this aircraft, and I was very pleased to be asked, but daunted. And very quickly, my friend Peter volunteered himself to be certainly number 1.5. He's as much number one as me, I consider, because I have no real leadership qualities, I don't think. But he's been very, very useful. We've built if we could just go apart from the team for 1 second, we've managed to build a little hangar for ourselves with a bench for working on. We've got lighting in the building, a little bit more lighting in the building we had. And slowly but surely, people have been attracted to the aircraft. I'm not so sure if you knew Carl Pete at first. So Carl dropped in and he was very eager to join the team. He has a good knowledge background as well. We have Jim Bean, who drops in occasionally with his paperwork requirements. But at the minute, I think we're down to 3 people regularly. If anybody else wishes to join, we're very welcome. Oh, and we've got Dave. Sorry, I forgot about Dave there. So we're down to about 4 regular people. And like I say, Dave's invaluable with his knowledge of the skinning, particularly the process in reskinning the aircraft. We do, as Peter's mentioned, we're able to lean on Trevor and Roger, who've got very good engineering contacts, very good engineering knowledge, and are able to get things done for us. That was amazing, getting those bolts made for free by this APEL company. They were fantastic because, like Pete said, the bolts weren't just an easy bolt; they were a tapered shape. But other members of the museum, Pete Little, Ray Reeder, they'll bob in, and they've given us a lift. Like just this morning, we've managed to push the aeroplane into a different orientation so we can put the second engine on, hopefully before Christmas. But yes, we're a little nucleus of 4, but anybody else, when we require them, has very quickly stepped in.
Yeah, there's a lot of expertise and skills in the museum that we can call on when we need them. And there's Roy, of course, who's been here forever, who was probably here when they built the Anson.
So as always, yeah, it's teamwork, isn't it? And as we always remind listeners, nobody gets paid. It's everyone's a volunteer, aren't they? So to round off, thank you ever so much for giving us that picture of this exciting project. Do we have an end date? Do we have a target date when we think it might be finished, or is it a bit like how long is a piece of string?
To be honest with you, Chris, I haven't got an end date in my head. What I think the idea in my head has been to make the aircraft look as good as possible for visiting public on the days when we can open it, rather than doing everything, do what looks good from afar, even though it might be far from good. But if people can come and say, oh, wow, that looks great, and ask a few questions, we've got a bit of information on the walls, for instance, that's my priority at the minute. We do know that if we do too much to the aircraft, it's going to all need undoing eventually when we do get the extension to move the aircraft across. But rather than leaving it, in a sort of workshop shape, we're hoping to just make it look a better museum piece.
So the answer is, it'll take as long as it takes, isn't it? I think that's the simple answer. Thank you ever so much. That's great. Thank you. Thank you once again to Steve and Pete. Their project and their teamwork are a really good example of all the activity that goes on behind the scenes of a museum, with so many volunteers that visitors may not meet, but whose work is absolutely crucial in bringing the Avro story to life for the public. We are enormously indebted to them. And by the way, if you feel that you could contribute to telling that Avro story by taking part in a podcast, perhaps you could email us on podcasts@avroheritagemuseum.co.uk. That's podcasts@avroheritagemuseum.co.uk, and we could see if we could set that up for you. Thank you for listening. Until the next episode, do take care, but it's bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.